What's good in the hood, YouTube? This is Crazy Samurai 71 here, bringing you another video. Today I'm bringing you a video on Power Rangers Ninja Steel. This is for the Christmas episode. Now, some of the information that I talked about in previous videos regarding it was a little bit off, but as a whole, it worked. Specifically the fact that they get back their power stores. They do, but they don't get them back permanently. It's just this episode. And it makes sense because it's sort of like how you would explain it during the follow-up season that they get back their actual power stars. They get back their power stars, but they just get it back to fight a monster. That's what that is. So that was a mistake on my part, and I really wish I hadn't said what I did say in the comments of videos and through some of my videos in general, what was going on there. What did I think of it? It was okay. It was definitely not really good. I thought it was alright. It did update a few things, and it did have some interesting things that if you pay attention to it you would note, but it is supposed to take place directly after the final episode, so that's something great to note that I actually appreciate a lot, because a lot of times holiday episodes tend to happen where they might be episodes that take place somewhere before the final episode but after a certain point in the show. In this case, this is clearly after the final episode, and there's a lot of clues as to how that is the case. For example, there's no Galvanox, there's none of that ship scene. We never see Mick, so that's obvious, except for in the clip show where that's something. But as far as things go, it was alright. It just could have been better. So basically, let me give you a general idea of what happens in it. So Sarah ends up getting everyone presents because she kept a diary that she was able to write down every single time someone asked, oh, I want this item, I really would like this. So she always knew, okay, I'll get these presents, I'll get this for him, and I'll get this for her on Christmas. Like, that's how she knew stuff. At the same time, she ends up asking everyone for presents, and they don't have a real response for her, not because they didn't get her anything, but because they just don't know how to say it properly. But we don't know that till the very end, so what happens is that Sarah's upset, and eventually a monster appears. This monster basically looks like Catalog. The reason why it is in the Catalog, and it has more of a feminine voice, is because it is Cleopatra, like Cleopatra. So interesting. Generally just the exact same design with some small minor differences, but you get the point. So anyway, Cleopatra wants revenge for her brother, her cousin, Cataclock, for being destroyed by the Rangers. And so what happens is that she ends up using a time device to freeze the Rangers in time. All of them get frozen except for Sarah, and the reason why this happens is because the Rangers can't morph. As we know, they lost their power stars, and that's the thing that's great, is that during the whole background, they always do at the very beginning of episodes, describing how they got their powers and everything, they actually updated it to feature the fact that they destroyed Galvanox, but they lost their power stars for now. So that's important, because what that means is they did have an update, and that will probably more than likely be what we'll be seeing during Super Ninja Steel. The same kind of update for now until we get new villains and stuff. That we'll have to wait and see, but keep that in mind that what we see here is probably what we're going to see at the very beginning of Super Ninja Steel before we get introduced to any new villains, which we probably will be. So as far as things go following this, what does end up happening is that she ends up going out of the building, finds Santa, who is on his sleigh, and what happens is that Cleopatra is going after her, and she steals. I recommend that she ends up stealing the time device that Cleopatra has and running off to Santa. Santa makes some dumb excuse about something to do with Victor and Monty, even though in reality there's a whole other reason why he's there. And so they end up traveling through this time tunnel that Sarah ends up putting in some buttons, and they travel there. Now, this tunnel doesn't necessarily have a real destination. It's just this tunnel. I don't get the purpose behind it, other than the fact that it allowed Sarah and Santa to get away from Cleopatra. Because in reality, it didn't do anything. It just kind of was a place. Really pointless, more or less so. But interesting, I guess. So anyway, they have no power stars and they need to have something to fight Cleopatra. So Sarah ends up talking to Santa about how she kept a diary, and maybe she can find certain dates where she can find each of the Rangers when they're alone and take their power stars temporarily. So, for starters, we end up seeing Sarah go to her episode, which was episode 7, which I'm going to make sure that I actually give you guys the right episode name, which is Hack Attack. Hack Attack, remember, was Sarah's episode where she created the clones. So this is that episode. So they end up doing a whole clip show background on that, and then there's a moment where Sarah's alone, so Sarah meets Sarah. Sarah of the past meets Sarah of the future, and she gives her the power star. And the reason why Sarah of the past knows that it's not a clone and it is her is because she is the only one that has her diary, which means that if Sarah of the past has a diary and she has a diary, they must be the same person. So that was the hint there. So the next one is Gold Rush. Gold Rush was the next episode that we ended up seeing that was shown off here, because she, after she gets the power star, she goes back to Santa, then she finds the date that would work, and it was that one. So we end up seeing the clip show of Gold Rush, which was the episode where Levi was introduced. And then after Levi ends up giving Brody the job as a bodyguard, Brody runs away, and then Levi is alone, so she ends up mentioning to him about getting his power star, and he's like, what's that? And she ends up showing him the power star, and he's like, oh yeah, I have that. And so then he ends up going to his manager, who ends up giving it to him and giving it to her. So then she travels back to Santa again. This time she ends up going to the Ranger Ribbon episode, which is episode 10, which is where the Rangers had to protect the ribbon tree that was being attacked by Preston's father in order to get Calvin, and she ends up going there to get Calvin and Haley's power source, because if you remember in that episode, there was a point where the two of them ended up in a tree making calls to different people trying to advertise protecting the tree. So at that point, she ends up going there after the Rangers had left and asks for the power stars, and it becomes hard for her to explain. So at one point she's just like, guys, have your power stars? And they're just like, yeah, sure. it was really just like that. I mean, it was really just like, sure, why not? Like, they weren't gonna argue. So then the next one was for Preston, and Preston, they end up going to Monkey Business, which is episode 16. So yeah, 3 episodes later, and it was during the food fight. So Preston actually drops his power star at one point, and Sarah just basically grabs it and says thank you, and then travels back to the time tunnel. So yeah, there was no conversation. There was just her saying thank you. And then the last one, which is a big deal, was Brody. The reason why this is a big deal is because it was during the final episode, the last episode that we saw, Galvanox Rise. And what happens is that it's after, all the Rangers had been captured except for Brody, and Mick was there as well. And what happens is that she ends up having to ask Brody for the power star. And the thing is that he's resistant to giving it to her because he is left as the only one that has a power star right now. If he doesn't have it, he could lose. But the thing is that they basically say to her, she basically explains to him that, I'm in the exact same situation. If I don't do this, we might lose and we might be in real trouble. So basically it's like, what do you do in that case? And she basically tries to reassure him and make him feel more comfortable with it, and he trusts her in the end, but it was still kind of a hesitant feeling. And also he even asked, so what am I going to do to stop the attack from Galvanox? And basically Sarah says is, in time you'll know. So yeah, I mean, the show kind of works its way in, and it was clever because what that means is during each of these episodes they had to go back and add these little moments in, and it was nice because it was a minute each, some even less. So it's kind of nice to see that they did do that, and they were willing to be a little bit more creative with stuff. So those are the main episodes that were actually like referenced here. Following all this, they end up traveling back to right after the Rangers were zapped by Cow Clock. Well, like practically during that. So what happens is that after they get zapped, Sarah ends up running off like she did in the actual episode. But then the Sarah of the future that traveled to the past ends up going to the Rangers, giving them each their power stars, basically saying that there's not enough time to explain what happened, but here are your power stars. Let's deal with the monster. So at that point, Cleopatra appears after chasing after the Sarah that went to the past to meet up with the Rangers that had been zapped. And the thing is that she wanted to destroy the Rangers that were frozen because maybe since they were frozen they weren't going to move, but because there was the one in the future that actually brought the power stars back to the past, basically at that point they're all morphed. They fight Cleopatra, and what we see is the Rangers fighting. Brody gets to use the Lion Fire mode, which is cool. And at one point, the time device is used by Brody, and he uses it to actually become gigantic. So he becomes gigantified. At the same time, Cleopatra uses the device to turn gigantic, so she becomes gigantified. And then what we see all of a sudden, which really isn't explained at all, but just sort of shows up after the two of them begin to fight, is the Robo Red Zord. It shows up. Now, it seems very out of place, the Robo Red Zord, just because, for starters, there's no explanation. He didn't summon it. It just sort of showed up. The other thing is that that's more significant if you watch the Japanese show, because in the Japanese show there were a number of moments where the Robo Red Zord had a mind of its own, and you have to remember that like Redbot and the Robo Red Zord, even though they have like generally the same design, they're considered separate things in this case, even though people consider them similar. They're not. So it does seem out of place. In fact, at one point, like they end up like fist bumping and everything, and it just looks so out of place because it's sort of like, why would that even be the case? Because it doesn't fit the general story that goes on in Ninja Steel. It's where it seems like, why are they suddenly being like this? This doesn't make any sense. Now, again, you could just say, oh, it's my Zord, that's why they're doing that, but if you know the context of the Japanese, you know that there's a real reason why they did this, and it just seems kind of weird if you've watched that, and it's my opinion, because I've seen that, and I know what they're doing here. It just seems kind of weird to me. But as a whole, after that, they do end up defeating the monster. Eventually, they do show up back at the school tree where they were giving out gifts and everything. And the ranger, and like she says, it's alright if you didn't give me gifts, guys. I understand. It's all good. And what ends up happening is that she ends up, prior to this, basically throwing the time gadget into a fiery pit to destroy it after she goes to the past and delivers the power stars directly back to the ranger so that they have them in those time periods. Because they can't screw up the time stream. That would make no sense. And by destroying the device, that completely fixes everything. So then, following this, yes, she says, like, it's alright if you didn't get me anything, but they say, well, who says that we didn't get you anything? And at that point, they go outside of the school and they find Santa Claus. And the reason why Santa Claus was there was because they were going to get her the gift of, she likes speed and stuff like that, so she gets the chance to ride Santa's sleigh and actually control it. So she gets to hold the reins and everything of the sleigh. So that's really cool. And basically they go off into the sky and Santa says ho ho ho, and the episode basically ends. So as a whole, this episode was alright. I thought it could be a little bit better. I actually thought it was going to be kind of expanding the story. It did, because it does actually show that this is supposed to be after the final episode, which I appreciate that factor. As a whole, it was not necessarily the greatest episode. It was kind of mixed. Overall, not really that great. I mean, in each case, it was primarily a clip show, so a large portion of the episode was that. But there were some unique things added here and there. Again, Power Rangers Super Ninja Steel is going to be releasing next year, January, so that's something to look forward to. So not that long away. I would say about 8 weeks. You should expect to see that. Is that right? Yeah, about 8 weeks. So keep it in mind. 8 weeks, roughly, give or take, 8 or 7, something along those lines. And yeah, Power Rangers Ninja Steel Christmas episode. This was it. I hope you guys actually enjoyed this episode. I personally found it alright. Again, it's not necessarily the most important episode of the overall show. I thought it was going to be a little bit more important. It was not. It was good in the senses that it expanded on things. One thing that I even wanted to mention that seemed a little out of place was that we ended up seeing the Ninja Nexus Prism in the episode, which doesn't make any sense at all because the Ninja Nexus Prism shouldn't exist. It was destroyed, so why is it there, you know? That seems a little weird. I don't know what that is. It could just be a stupid mistake on their parts that they didn't catch. But continuity-wise, that was one error that I would say definitely slipped them, at least in my opinion. That could have been remedied with them just not having it show up there, but it was. So again, that's about it for me. I love to hear your opinion. Did you guys enjoy this episode? I personally found it alright. It was not that great. It was okay. Please remember to like, comment, subscribe, tell me what you guys think. I want to hear your opinions, and I'll see you guys in the next videos. Until then, guys, I'm Crazy Sarah 1, and goodbye, guys.